Hi everyone, welcome back for another weekly astrology forecast, astrology overview. This week is going to be a biggie. This is kind of when the rubber hits the road, so to speak. As I always say every week, oh, this is going to be a big week, but this is really interesting, really pivotal, especially coming off of last week and last week's events. The major planetary action last week being Mercury square Saturn twice, once at the beginning of the week and once near the end of the week, because in the middle, Mercury turned around and ended its retrograde passage and started moving forward. So it immediately repeated the square to Saturn that it activated on November the 1st on Sunday and resolved on Friday, which, as we now know, that is the completion of the count. It seemed that the count for the US election was slowed down because of this, we could say because of, just from the astrology perspective, it's just uncanny that configuration, which can, signify delays or blockages or frustrations in Mercury type information being delivered in an expedient manner, since Saturn likes to create limitations and boundaries and slow things down. It was just pretty uncanny that all of that was coinciding with Mercury's movement last week. So as of this morning, I learned that the presidential race seems to be resolved. The Democrats have won, and I know that many American neighbors are super happy and relieved about that. Not to downplay all of the important work that is still ahead for this major nation and the world, but at least I think most folks are feeling like now this is an administration and set of values that people can really align with and work with for the betterment of everyone, hopefully. But yes, lots of work to do. The astrology mirrors that for the rest of the year and certainly into the next and beyond. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. So that was a pretty epic week. And I'm Canadian by birth, and I'm up here in Canada, and that was not my nation's election, but I actually feel a physical and visceral body relief and body release. So I can only imagine how that must feel for folks down in the States. Congratulations, everyone. And it'll be exciting to see what unfolds in the new journey ahead. So, rubber meets the road. This is the word, the phrase that keeps coming to mind when I think about this bracket of time from Monday, November the 9th till Sunday, November the 15th. So let's dig in. Let's have a look. So Monday, the moon's day, starts off with the moon sextile Mercury. So that's a moon that was in fiery Leo all weekend, and I think that moon's shift to a fiery and intensive and upbeat sign seemed to coincide with the information of the vote and the victory turning over finally decisively. So the moon sextile Mercury, who's still in airy Libra very early Monday morning, I think coincides with the feeling of communications flowing and moving smoothly and moving in harmony. Then the moon enters Virgo before sunrise, and this ends the void of course passage, which I don't really think would affect day-to-day affairs that much, because the void of course passage was very early in the morning in Pacific time, so I don't think anybody was starting any new ventures that they hope to take root, but just to note it. Then there's a really interesting planetary aspect that occurs just as the day opens on Monday morning, and it's the start of a string of very fraught and difficult planetary aspects that Venus, the planet of cohesion and harmony, relationship, attraction, that binding and cohesive force of love in the universe or in nature and in our lives. This planet is very powerfully placed at the moment in Libra, its home air sign. So Venus is in an incredibly empowered position as a planet, just in her dignity and in her placement. So typically that would bode really well for those matters that Venus has sway over. So it certainly, I think, mirrors that those are the intentions and the wishes and what folks are really trying to feel and tap into while Venus is traveling through Libra. Certainly Libra being the sign of the scales, so this is attached to ideas of equanimity and justice and balance, harmony and peace. But you know, harmony and peace don't really come along until true justice is served, right? So we don't want to just be saying, oh, let's just keep the peace. But if justice actually isn't served, then there really isn't a true sense of peace, at least not for everyone. But Venus is in a position to really uphold all of those things that I just mentioned. So yeah, typically that would bode really well. We would say, oh wow, wonderful, like this is a really wonderful passage for love and harmony and equanimity, and Venus is very empowered and we can tap into Venus. But as I say, she's about to enter a very bit of a fraught and difficult passage this month, because she's making really kind of confrontational and edgy and difficult aspects with some of these heavy and major planetary players who are also in cardinal signs this year, at least at this half or edge of the year that we're in now. So the first of those being Venus will oppose Mars, who is still retrograde for just a little while longer in fiery Aries. So Venus and Mars are both in their home signs, and they both have maximal powers and position to uphold what it is that they bring about in nature and in our lives. So Venus, as we just mentioned, very powerfully placed, but Mars is too. But Mars, as we know, is a bit frustrated and volatile and a bit unpredictable, kind of like that, you know, symbol I have referenced before. It's a feeling like a boiling pot, like Mars is heat and initiative, and Aries is, you know, drive and individuality. These are things that are very fiery and propulsive and really want to burst forth with a lot of momentum. But a retrograde feeling is kind of like a holding back or drawing back on the slingshot, or tamping down that boiling with a tight lid. It's not going to last for long. Eventually the tension needs to be released because this planet wants to propel forward. So these two energies in their maximum potency are facing off in an opposition on Monday, and this is how the week is opening. And this configuration of the opposition, where two planets are like across each other in the sky or across each other in the zodiac wheel, reminds me of the, I guess you would call it the infinity symbol or the lemniscate. It's that figure 8 on its side. It's like a feedback loop of infinity. And this is something that the philosopher Empedocles, way back when, in the formative years of Western astrology and Western culture, conceptualized this, you know, lemniscate, or this, you know, feedback loop, as the energy or the dynamics that are at work in nature that keep all of the elements, the four elements, circulating and moving, and it's this force of change that's dynamically working on all of these things at once. So it's ensuring that, you know, transformation and growth and generation is happening, and also you know, aging and decay and decomposition, but also rebirth and fertility. So these things are constantly cycling through in this fashion. And what he conceptualized was that on one side of the loop was the force of love, which Venus represents, and that's cohesion, everything gelling and attracting and coming together. So when everything is in this nice gelled and homogenized sort of sphere in nature, everything is kind of glued together and things are quite inert, but then of course there's not a lot of action. But this is sort of like that ultimate sort of state. But then on the other side of this loop, we have the force of strife, which is represented by Mars. And this is the cutting, the separating, the breaking down, the tearing down of matter into more and more and more disparate, broken parts. So it's kind of like the opposite of the cohesion and the congealing that Venus represents with love, the force of love. Mars represents the breaking down and tearing down, distributing and scattering the elements so that they don't feel like they have any stick or cohesion. So we know that in this cycle of nature, these things have to happen to some extent, like things come together, life renews, but then, you know, it decays and it falls and everything breaks apart. But then the force of love pulls all those broken parts back together to create again, and then it crashes back into this cycle, ever renewing. Well, I feel like the Venus in Libra and the Mars in Aries, both in their maximal strength, exactly opposite each other, and right exactly in the middle of the signs, each at 15 degrees, represents a highlighting of these potent and fundamental forces in nature and in our lives. At this moment, we feel like we're on a precipice, we're on the turning point where we can feel the forces of strife dividing everyone being, you know, kind of fighting with each other, but also we see that the misuse of the planet and the planet being kind of almost like chopped up into just resources and energy being scattered. Everything just seems like it's in this ultimate state of disrepair and discombobulation, and things are breaking down, even relationships, communications, people that are inhabiting a planet together who have vast differences and vast economic and social realities that are clashing, often people who are living well at the expense of someone else, and then that group does not feel like they have the foothold to take back some equilibrium. So you can see that maximum strife really has reached its peak. But at the same time, it highlights the urgency for the most potent force of love and harmony and justice to draw on that brokenness and that discombobulation and somehow find something uniting to repair and to heal, to hopefully bring folks back together again. Not, as I say, just to keep some kind of, you know, surface peace because let's be nice and let's get along, but like, let's really dig into this with a fierce love that can make true justice possible. And when true justice is possible, this is when things can really come back together in that ultimate force of love and harmony. So the two, I feel like, are heightened and potent and in their maximal force, and it's held in this perfect tension, this perfect polarity where we could go, it's almost like we could go either way. Like this surge and this wave of love and hunger for justice could somehow unite everyone and pull everything back together, and yet things are so fraught and we've been living under such frustration and fear and injustice and confusion for so long that it almost feels like things could just be on the verge of breaking apart beyond all repair. But just to know that this idea was conceptualized in the roots of our civilization, in the roots of our philosophy, in the roots of the elemental forces that we use, say in medical astrology or in astrology in general, that there is this understanding that there's something cyclical and eternal at work here. So in a way, when things seem like they are just beyond repair or beyond hope, we can trust that the force of love will always have a magnetic draw and have a power and a potency that if we tap into it, we can start to pull back on the forces of strife and things will come together. It almost seems like it's just a matter of nature and a matter of time. So that's my thoughts on that configuration, and that's what we're opening the week on, especially after this great electional victory, and what this could begin to mean for people that are hungering for deeper justice, so that a true sense of peace and well-being can be possible for everyone in equality, and true equality and value of all life, and that includes nature, if you're going to ask me, and all the beings that preside there, that we are not above them, but that we're part of them. So those are my reflections on that aspect. So I will offer that, and we'll see how things go. We'll see how the turning of the tide plays out. I'm definitely on the side of love, because I know that we need it, but I know that sometimes there are things that are worth fighting for if, push comes to shove. So it could even be that we're in an interesting time where we've got to actually hold those two forces in some kind of working balance so that true change can happen. Like the justice, we can't have the justice without the breaking down of what is actually impeding it. Could even be a way to look at it too. So that was a big chat on that aspect, but it's so potent, it's so powerful. It's a really strong symbolism, and certainly my attention in the overview of the year, there's been some pretty major planetary activity, but my attention really converges around this one just because of the two forces that are being held in this very tight polarity and potential balance or complementary action, if that's possible. So moving on, the moon, of course, now being in an earth sign, will form trine with Uranus, and then an opposition with Neptune later in the evening. So the evening could have a little bit of an unusual and uncanny and dreamy kind of vibe. Then on Tuesday, Mars's day of the week, interestingly enough, we have the moon sextile the sun. That's the moon in Virgo sextile the sun in Scorpio. That's a time where the moon is really paring down to this waning crescent appearance as it's getting smaller and smaller toward the new moon phase, which is coming soon. Then Mercury re-enters Scorpio. Mercury entered Scorpio way back on September 27th, but then of course went retrograde in between. It entered Libra while moving reverse at the end of October with Venus. And now, since Mercury turned around last week, is going back into Scorpio. This is a sign that is ruled by Mars, so it takes the quality of communications and the focus of our thinking and our speech out of the realm of the equanimous or diplomatic and airy sort of efforts of the Libran sign, and into this kind of deep, penetrative, and almost X-ray vision type of world of nocturnal Scorpio under a very strong Mars's guidance and rulership. So the tone of communications, I think, returned to one that was pretty similar at the beginning of this original Mercury passage into Scorpio, which was September 27th, as I mentioned. So a feeling tone in communications has reemerged now, where things start to really get a lot more investigative, very penetrating, very focused, seeing into the shadows and rooting out the ultimate truth. Things being very, like our communications being very instinctive, and things being very intimate and very, very raw and very intensive. Then, of course, the moon trine Jupiter and Pluto happens in the evening on Tuesday, because the moon is in an earth sign. So that brings the kind of earthy lunar sort of energies in harmony with those heavy planets in Capricorn. So maybe a little bit of a sense of ease, or a sense of being able to work with those energies constructively for a time. Wednesday, on Mercury's day, we very early in the morning have the moon trine Saturn, finishing up that series of earth trines with the outer planets that are all grouped in Capricorn. So anytime the moon is in an earth sign, it will have a major aspect with Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn, until at least the end of the year, when some of those planets move along. And yeah, that's, I think, just kind of a grounding, stabilizing feeling for a time with the moon in a grounded earth sign. Then the moon void, of course, begins. That's the last aspect the moon makes before changing signs. And then the moon enters Libra, Aries Libra, to join with Venus in that sign. So this is a little bit of a switch, a lunar switch in the vibe, and that's a really strong lunar vibe, because it's being ruled over and it's co-present with a very, very powerful Venus, who's working some really potent love magic amid some really dangerous and dire times and circumstances. So maybe that opens up a connection or a feeling with that potent power of love from that intimate, emotional, and lunar perspective. Then the moon later in the afternoon, early evening, forms an opposition with Chiron, and we know that that's often a time where the topic of the inner wound comes up a little bit more into conscious awareness, so a time to tap into and reflect on that. Thursday, November the 12th, on Jupiter's day, we have a moon opposite Mars, because remember the moon is in Libra, opposite Mars, similarly the way that Venus was at the beginning of the week. This is a very fleeting aspect because the moon moves quickly, but it can raise some intense feelings engaging with potent Mars in an opposition. Again, it's that like trying to keep emotions balanced and harmonized, but coming up against a bit of a tug-of-war effect with a really strong, frustrated, fiery, propulsive planetary energy that can bring those feelings up in us or in little events around us at that time, just for a couple of hours. Then we have on Jupiter's day, interestingly enough, Jupiter forms a conjunction with Pluto. And this is a pretty major planetary aspect, because these two planets, as we know, move quite slowly. Pluto takes decades to get through a sign, and Jupiter takes about a year to fully get through a sign. So this is a repeat. There's been a string of 3 of these conjunctions between the planet of highest values, highest learning, spirituality to some extent, forming a conjunction with Pluto, the planet of irreversible change and transformative powers. This is the third and last conjunction of the year in Cardinal Capricorn that these planets will make. The first one was April 4th, the second one was June 29th, and now on November the 12th we have the final conjunction. So we've noticed that around these times there, Jupiter is associated with like finances and bounty to some extent, and laws and systems that are associated with these and how these are distributed, etc. And Pluto, of course, is also associated with finances, like you've heard that word plutocracy, like, and in the old mythology, Pluto was a very wealthy underworld god. So it can be incredible wealth, but it can also be hidden things like hidden powers or mysterious sources for such wealth or power. So it's just been noted in the astrological community that every time this conjunction has occurred this year, that there's like a huge movement or redistribution of financial resources and sort of like the laws or systems that facilitate these. So I just think it's interesting that we've had this huge change in electoral powers in this the most powerful country, one of the most powerful countries on the planet. And now we have this conjunction again. So I'm just sort of wondering what that means economically and legally for the world when it comes to distributing finances and resources. And we're talking about like large sums, or from a really people in very powerful positions handling this. So that's at 22 degrees Capricorn, and every time that conjunction occurred this year, it was around that degree. I think it was like 21 in one instance and maybe 19 in another. I could be wrong, but it was pretty close. So if anybody has any cardinal placements in their birth chart around 22 degrees, this will form, a strong aspect to that in your birth chart, and there might be something significant going on for you that parallels some changes that come into effect in the world at large. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think the last time that conjunction happened, those planets were retrograde, so that can kind of delay or stall things. So now when we see like aspects repeating and then the planets are moving direct, sometimes that can signify things moving forward or moving ahead. So it's interesting to note. So just as an exercise, pay attention to the news or anything that sort of pops up in your life, and some of those keywords that I mentioned, just see if there's any correlate and parallel. And it might not happen exactly at that time or on that day, but it could be in a couple of days leading up, or maybe even in the day after. Then of course, with the moon being in a cardinal sign, it makes edgy squares to Pluto and Jupiter in the evening, but before that it forms a really nice conjunction with Venus. So that's quite a powerful and potent lunar transit, even though it's only a couple of hours long. That definitely would, I think, give a mood or a vibe that we could tap into that is very loving or optimistic or beautiful and serene. But then at the same time, that energy is up against these squares with Pluto and Jupiter and eventually Saturn the next day. So it's sort of like some really, really good things and good feelings, but at the same time, really feeling the reality of still there being some hard work to do, or some deeper topics or issues that continue to linger and need to be contended with. Friday, November the 13th, Friday the 13th. I don't know if you believe in Friday the 13th as a day to pay attention to. I don't even know where that tradition came from, but it's always kind of like a spooky day or an unlucky day, where some folks adopt it and take it on and reverse the meaning and say that it's actually very lucky. I don't know where you stand with Friday the 13th, but it's notable. And there's some really interesting stuff that happens on Friday the 13th. We very early morning have the moon square Saturn, which is always a bit of an edgy, uncomfortable, and maybe frustrating kind of feeling. But since it's very early in the morning, I don't know if it's something we're going to feel necessarily. It may coincide to some like events or topics emerging in the early morning that need to be sorted. But, you know, before that really could happen though, like the moon will enter Scorpio at 8:19 a.m. Just around sunrise. The moon void, of course, ends, of course. Every time the moon goes into a new sign, the void, of course, is over and things are, you know, good or ripe for planting seeds or intentions or getting things started typically. And that's important to note because this is the sign that the moon will go dark in, fully dark, to form the new moon phase in a couple of days. So things are kind of like coalescing and merging and coming together in Scorpio because Mercury's back in town, and then we've got the moon in there that's about to go dark. And then, of course, we know that Scorpio is ruled by Mars, and Mars is about to do something pretty big. So I think paying attention to Friday the 13th as being a really potent, pivotal day and turning point for us personally and collectively. Then, as I said, the moon is with Mercury in that sign. So then the moon forms a perfect conjunction with Mercury at 1:44 p.m. Pacific. So that's the lunar awareness, the emotional tone, the visceral kind of sublunar kind of feeling sense. It's quite intimate and very penetrating and incisive in Scorpio, merging with the planet of communications in Scorpio, bringing that feeling very tightly into contact with the planet of communications. So I wonder what might come to the surface around that time for communications, personally and collectively. It just feels very potent and very intense, and I think it's something to keep an eye on, and it certainly could be a really deep and kind of probing or reflective or investigative mood. And then Mars, who rules over Scorpio, as I've underscored, goes direct. Finally. Oh boy. Finally, for better or for worse, whatever Mars wants to get up to and kick up in our lives personally and collectively is no longer going to be kind of volatile and unreliable and frustrated, but is now going to be unleashed, and things will begin to speed up and quicken and begin to connect and resolve toward the end of the year. So wherever Mars is transiting in your birth chart, like whatever house Aries is connected to in your birth chart, that represents an area of life that has earlier in the summer received a really like strong signature of propulsion and initiative and hard work, and even a sense of maybe being really like heated and almost overdriven, like, okay, come on, let's go. And then at the beginning of September, I think it was the 9th, Mars turned retrograde. So ever since the beginning of September, something that we've been feeling like was getting this huge martial jolt has just been kind of simmering under that tight pot lid, and it's a bit frustrated and it blurts out sometimes, and you think you're making progress, but then not really quite, and it's frankly quite tiring. All of that, starting Friday the 13th, will start to be able to move forward and move on. And anytime a planet is stationing direct, like when we say that, like Mars goes direct, it's almost like a position of Mars coming to a standstill. Like Mars is quite slow because it was moving retrograde, it slows down, it stops, and then it turns around and starts to move forward again. So it doesn't really have a lot of speed yet, but it will in the upcoming days, the further and further along it gets in its direct path. So it's interesting to note that that pivot, that direct station, has Mars pausing for emphasis at 15 degrees Aries, and that's roughly where that opposition with Venus happened earlier in the week. It was at about 15 degrees Mars, so it's really putting a pin in that degree coordinate. So again, pay attention to 15 degrees in your birth chart. If you have cardinal placements at 15 or even, 14 or 16 degrees, this planet or this angle or this point in your chart will get a really strong, it will receive the charge and the energy of this pivot of Mars, and the two will, planets in your chart or angles will kind of combine and activate and signify a momentum that is occurring, straddling those connections. If you have placements that are not in cardinal signs around 15 degrees, you might receive, instead of like a cardinal square or opposition, as I formerly suggested, you might, in say mutable placements, you might be getting sextiles or trines, which could be a little more harmonious or a little bit easier to handle or to manage. Full disclosure, in my chart, I'm getting both. I'm getting a nice cardinal square from Mars, and then I'm also going to get a really nice fire trine to a mutable placement that I have. So I'm curious to see how that Friday feels. I'm certainly already, even today, I don't know if it's just like I'm super relieved about what happened with the election, and lately I've been getting some really cool and fun ideas about my work, but I almost kind of feel like I'm getting a little bit of energy back. I'm kind of good at faking it, but I sincerely feel like I'm getting a little bit of energy back, and I'm a pretty, interestingly enough, Marsy person. I've got some big Mars in my chart, so I'm looking forward to it. And hello, children of Mars out there, people with major Mars placements, and especially the cardinal folks. This should be an interesting feeling, and things will start to move forward. And I always have to say, everything will move forward, but for better and for worse. It's not to say that just because everything is moving forward, everything is going to be an easy cakewalk. It just might mean that finally you're able to do the work you need to do, or then the work you have to do, because there is definitely work ahead, and there's some work to do. So that's a biggie, and that's really interesting that some things are converging that day. The moon entering Mars' sign, the moon joining Mercury under Mars' sign, and then Mars moving direct. Then in the evening we have the moon opposite Uranus, and that's always kind of a fun, kind of edgy sort of feeling. It's got a little bit of an echo or a signature to Halloween, because remember, the moon was conjunct Uranus on Halloween, and that just shows how far the moon has traveled in the sky since then, because Uranus and the moon were together on Halloween, and then the moon kept moving through the zodiac, and now the moon is all the way 6 signs away from Uranus in Scorpio opposite. So the moon has moved, and now it's seeing Uranus from the oppositional angle after having that really potent conjunction. So it'll be interesting to reflect on what developments have happened, and maybe some surprises or innovations are in our mind on Friday evening. Then there's some really big things that happen on Saturday the 14th. The moon and the sun are both in Scorpio, and they're coming together to form a new moon at 9:07 p.m. at 23 degrees Scorpio. So highlighting that degree, 23 degrees. If you have fixed placements in your chart at around 23 degrees, that moon is going to make some potent angles to those placements. If you have cardinal, or if you have, mutable. You're going to get that 23-degree new moon from a different angle, maybe more like sextiles and trines. And then, of course, since the moon and the sun are so close together as Saturday begins, they do this interesting thing where they're kind of like, they're both making aspects at a similar time in a similar way to the major outer planets. So we have the moon, the sun sextile Pluto as the day begins, just before noon, and then the moon forms a trine with Neptune, then the sun forms a sextile with Jupiter, then the moon forms a sextile with Pluto, then the moon forms a sextile with Jupiter. So you see, like, they're coming together, they're very close, and they're both from a very similar position aspecting the same planets. And then just like minutes after the moon is exactly sextile Jupiter, the new moon forms. This is when the moon and the sun are perfectly in the same place. So we could effectively just shortcut or shorthand that day and say the new moon in Scorpio at 23 degrees Scorpio is forming sextiles to all of the major outer planets in Capricorn, and also a trine to Neptune. So it's a flowing and harmonious series of aspects, but the new moon is always a portent of huge change and renewal. It's the death of the moon, and it's the death of certain efforts that have happened in the house that Scorpio is connected to, and it shows that the ground has been cleared, the ground has gone fallow, and everything is laying in wait to host some new growth that will take form over the next 6 months until we get to Taurus season, where we will have a full moon in Scorpio. So pretty huge, pretty pivotal, and it might have a lot to do with a lot of new beginnings that are going on in society at large, with changes in administration and laws. And of course, let's not forget all of the stuff that's going on with health and the virus protocols, etc. So it's a new moon in Scorpio, and Scorpio is kind of a dark nocturnal sign. It's a bit mysterious. And then of course the moon is dark and blacked out and mysterious. So, and then of course making these sextiles with Pluto and trines with Neptune. It's definitely got a really deep kind of, I want to say kind of a murky sort of mood, because it brings to mind like these really deep, dark, still waters that are full of interesting kind of like, symbolism or soul material or something mysterious that we need to dive down into or surrender into the dark of, to receive the insights, the fruits of what lay there. But it's got a little bit of an ominous kind of feeling, and it takes a little bit of courage to see that growth and renewal could come out of such a moody or kind of murky mood or circumstance. If you're a bit of a spooky person, or you're a Scorpio yourself, or you have strong Scorpio placements, this might be a mood that actually really excites you or appeals to you. So it's interesting to just go into that maybe on Saturday evening and play with that symbolism and those visualizations and those meditations. The new moon is not a good time to do any kind of, traditionally, any kind of like magical astrology or work where you want something to materialize or manifest. But new moon times can be really good times to reflect and go into the past, even connect with ancestry and our heritage, sit with feelings of grief or loss or letting go, and certainly letting go of things that we need to let go of, so that that new moon planting or that new moon clearing, that space is kind of cleared out and cleared away from anything that's, holding us back, or that's clingy or toxic, or it's past its due. because something wants to emerge in the next 6 months and wants to culminate and wants to bear fruit in Taurus season when the moon is full in Scorpio. So just sort of think about that new moon time on Saturday night being clearing, purifying, grieving, releasing, letting go if need be, and not trying to materialize or hold on to anything, because it's kind of like an energy that you want to let just release and pass. If that offers any ideas or insights or help at all. And then we have the final day, Sunday, November the 15th. The moon forms a sextile with Saturn very early in the morning, then goes void of course because that's the last aspect the moon makes. And then just to think about that too, that the moon is still quite dark when that happens and it makes that connection with Saturn. You know, that's a bit of a potent and serious, somber kind of connection, but one that I think could be workable and really feels like an aspect of Saturn represents ancestry and older persons and having reverence and connecting to wisdom. So there might be something about that, going into the darkness of the new moon on Saturday night, knowing that the moon is about to make a really important contact, at least just for a couple of hours, with Saturn, and reflect on that, like our roots, where we've come from, what we're grateful for, what we've been taught, thinking about our elders, or if we're elders ourselves, thinking about growing into those wisdom years and what we've got to give as elders, could be another thing to meditate on and think about. I know I'm pointing at my chest when I say elders. I don't think I'm an elder. I'm not trying to say that. I just meant like that's something that some folks might feel at certain phases in their life, in their heart. So, but certainly I'm in a certain age of life where I'm thinking ahead to eldership and wanting to prepare for this, and not wanting to appoint myself that role per se, but to earn it and have that perhaps be something that eldership is not something that you are or a title that you take, but I think it's more of what you do and how you act, and that could actually point to whether you're maybe deserving of that title in society. But it's really needed. It's so needed, so people feel called to wise, soulful eldership to help guide the young, energetic folks that are working very hard to bring about important changes and healing in our world. Yeah, remember that's important and that's needed. Then the moon enters fiery Sagittarius around sunrise in Pacific time on Sunday the 15th. The moon void of course ends, so that's a good day or good time for the rest of the day to kind of get some stuff done or begin some things that you want to do. Maybe some interesting insights came up in your new moon, letting go and reflections, and you've cleared space. So that really fiery, enthusiastic moon in Sagittarius might inspire some beginnings, some striking of the matches or sparks of ideas that might want to start growing or playing with the space that new moon cleared out and provided. Then Venus makes more of those edgy, hard aspects that I talked about at the beginning of the week, because Venus is in Libra, really powerfully placed, but Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn are also there. And she already made that really potent opposition with Mars. Now she's moving on to make the square aspect with Pluto and the square aspect with Jupiter. So it may bring up some edgier and more potent work and confrontation and some friction between, say, these mysterious transformative Plutonian powers and also Jupiter as it relates to laws and highest values. There might be a little bit of friction in between, Venus seeking cohesion and justice and having to work with these really intensive powers that are not going away overnight, that need to be handled and wielded and worked with to some extent. So that is a pretty busy week. There's a lot going on, all the lunar movements and changes as always, but then some really key and pivotal planetary aspects and changes in direction. So it should be noted that all of the planets in the sky at the moment, by the end of this week, will be on direct course. Everybody's direct. Mercury is direct. Venus is direct. Mars finally is direct. Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn have been for a while, and these are our major visible planets and our major players. So it's a feeling of things moving forward and momentum, for better or for worse, mostly for the better, because at least we can get to work and feel like we're getting some forward momentum. Worse in the sense that we can't really avoid anything that we maybe have been avoiding or sidestepping or skirting, and the work, it's not going to do itself. It's time to roll up those sleeves and get to work, and some good things will come of that, but some perseverance and concentration and dedicated effort is required. But Venus is still a Libra, so we can do it with inspiration and with heart and with creativity, and hopefully with a sense of goodwill permeating it all. So nice chatting with you. As usual, reach out if you'd like to have an astrology chart and find out exactly how all this is hitting your chart. And of course, reach out if you have any questions or any clarification, or maybe you have an idea of a video that you'd like me to do or something like that. I'm open and I'm here. So take care. We'll talk soon.